if we do want to proceed to the next step, you and I will talk together about what that looks like. Expressing that at the front of a conversation, at the front of a meeting, keeps the conversation from getting really clunky at the end.
Welcome into Impactful Conversations, stories and lessons for financial advisors. I'm your host, Dave Edgecombe. Joining me, we got Rick McDermott. He's the president of Sandler MP Solutions out of Cleveland, Ohio. He is speaking. He's one of our speakers for our annual kickoff event here down in Atlanta. We're thrilled to have you, and I'm thrilled to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Yeah, no, this is a world-class venue, JW Marriott here in Buckhead. So thanks for having me.
Yeah, we spared no expense. So the last time we talked, full disclosure, last time we spoke, it was on a Teams call, and you were seeing in the background 2 of my 4 kids melting down over goldfish. It was a lot. It was not my team's finest performance when I work from home, but it showed me that you're a patient man.
Well, there's nothing like authenticity, right?
And so, I was nailing it. I was nailing the authenticity on that day.
Yes, sir.
And when we talked, and what stood out to me in between, kids crying and screaming was, again, the patience and you asking good questions. And it leads me into this conversation about the Sandler sales methodology and what you guys preach and how you practice it. So I want that to be the lion's share of what we talk about.
Absolutely.
And we can kind of go from there. So I want to get to first things first. Why is patience so important when it comes to selling?
Well, it's and that's a wonderful question, right? Patience. And oftentimes what we find is that people who have a little bit of a shallow pipeline, let's just say, of qualified clients or prospects, I should say, they typically don't have a lot of patience, right? Because it's, they need a sale, right? They need to convert a piece of business, right? They need to get their career moving and put stuff in there to grow their AUM. And so patience sometimes isn't there. It's really important to have that because salespeople, and this isn't just a new advisor type activity. It happens all over the place. They get something called happy ears.
Okay.
Right now, happy ears. Let me explain what that is as it relates to patience. Happy ears is when advisors hear things that maybe weren't exactly said. Right? They feel like they've got a prospect, husband and wife getting close to retirement. They feel like there's a need. They feel like they're going to do business. They feel like they're going to take the next step with them, and they hear this, but they don't actually say it. The prospect does.
They're assuming
they're assuming, right? They make so many assumptions in the conversation. So patience, right? We have to look at, what are our keys? What are our qualification? How do we keep our hands on the wheel so we don't get ghosted at the end?
How important is it to figure out what those pain points are? Actually hearing them from the prospect.
Well, it's not our world; it's theirs. If we're truly in this to help people, and whatever that help looks like down the road, if we're truly in it for them, we've got to understand what their specific pain points are. And I always say, when we're in the conversation, our job is to really truly understand what unique problem or problems we're looking to solve for. At that point in time, our technical information, right, our data, our strategies might start to make sense.
Does the prospect always tell you? Do they always know what the pain point is?
Absolutely not. And that's right. That's our job, right? We can articulate our business like nobody else. And our expectation is people understand our business, but they can't articulate their issues, their challenges. They don't know. And quite frankly, this is something that I don't know if you'll ever hear this out of the Sandler content, but The World According to Rick, which I live in.
Well, I love that sitcom, by the way. That's a good show.
The World According to Rick. People don't argue with their own data. I also believe that if you ask somebody what their problems are, they're probably not going to tell you either they don't want to, because, right, they don't want to lose leverage, or they just can't articulate it. But regardless, when we give people an open-ended question like, well, what keeps you up at night with your finances? What we're really doing in that world is we're asking people to think critically. Now, critical thinking is calorically expensive. And so most people won't do it. Now, that's the essay question, right? And remember when you were in college, right? In college where you had that study buddy?
Somewhat.
Yeah, you had that study buddy with you, right? Mm-hmm. And that study buddy, and you're like whacking out over the final exam. And usually it was me who said something like, man, I hope this is multiple choice. We all wanted the multiple choice in college. But the reason because, right, the answers are somewhat there. They might be hidden. But also, essay questions are calorically expensive. We force people to think critically, and most people don't want to do that. They're here to absorb information and not really think too critically. So oftentimes we have to give them multiple choice questions. And so like pain, right, problems that we might be able to solve for people sometimes need to be handed to people in multiple choice format.
That's interesting. I was firing up ready to ask you what your favorite open-ended question was, but it sounds like you might have a favorite multiple choice question that you can position to somebody that can get a great answer from your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, multiple choice questions are great. I don't even know if they're open-ended, but like, let's assume, right? Mr. and Mrs. Prospect, oftentimes when people come in and see us, they have concerns about A, B, and C. Can you tell me a little bit about what your concerns are, right? And sometimes it's just a head start or
you've kind of
getting
planted
down
the
the
seed
road.
Of the other problems.
Get them,
okay.
Right? Sometimes you have to plant the seed. I often say that people struggle to articulate exactly what the problem is. And as an advisor, it's our job to be the tour guide, right?
Do you find that there's some resistance when they're trying to even answer those open-ended questions?
Let's talk about resistance. I mean, it's personal.
Oh yeah.
Right.
I mean running out of money, all these things, taking care of your family, taking care of your loved ones.
Yeah,
it hits home.
I mean, people hold their cards close to the vest. They keep typical salespeople at arm's length. And they're not ready to open up until they're ready to open up. And I think that's from a Sandler perspective. What I absolutely loved about the Sandler methodology was that, if we look like, act like, sound like a typical salesperson who's self-serving, who's just, pushing features and benefits galore, we typically will get people to clam up, right? I always say hard selling is good for one thing, and it's hard pushback.
Okay.
Right. And so oftentimes when we're not differentiating ourselves from what typical sales behavior looks like, we're going to get responses to typical sales behavior from prospects.
And that was when I was doing my YouTube research into the Sandler sales methodology, being not your average salesperson and approaching it through a different sort of route. And I think the 7 steps are probably paramount to that. So go ahead and rattle those off for me.
Well, I mean, you think about the 7, Sandler's a methodology, and, we usually say it's 7 selling strategies. When we can zip tie them together for a particular business, we can put people on steroids. The 7, right? The 7 steps, right? There's communication. And, in our journey, when we're working with, John Q. Public, we have to have transparent conversations. In order to help people, we have to have transparent conversations to get them to open up about their challenges, their problems, their goals. Some people don't even know what their goals are. We have to help them. And so we talk about communication, developing rapport with people, and some simple strategies to elevate somebody's, communication levels so we can get people to open up, have transparent conversations. The next step, what we call is upfront contracts, right? And those are simply mutual agreements, right? What did we mutually agree to? And oftentimes we have a rule at Sandler. It says the close is in the contract. And what that means is when we start a meeting with somebody, there's a clearly defined agenda that includes an outcome or outcomes, right? Mm-hmm. What's the possible outcome at the end of our conversation? We need to express that and get agreement on that, right? So usually when we're in a first call discovery call, the outcome might sound something like, hey, with 5 minutes left in the conversation, we'll lean in, we'll compare some notes, figure out if there's a path forward. One of us might decide that there's not, and that's okay. Let's just make sure we have a great conversation on that. If we do want to proceed to the next step, you and I will talk together about what that looks like. Now, expressing that at the front of a conversation, at the front of a meeting, keeps the conversation from getting really clunky at the end.
Okay, that
So we
makes sense.
call this upfront contracts, and upfront contracts are just mutual agreements designed to thread the conversation to the next step or stop the process. I think this is a good time to actually talk about what a sales process really is.
Okay.
It's navigating an opportunity from beginning to end, whether that end is closing the sale or closing the file. So these upfront contracts allow us to get to the end. As consultants, and remember, we're different than other salespeople. We're truly in consultative mode. No is okay, right? And so we have to put that one on the table. Furthermore, like when we do put no on the table, it depressurizes conversations and allows people to open up a little bit more, knowing that they have the option to say no. So that's step one. Step two, right? Communication, upfront contract. Then we really get into the qualification step, right? Qualify hard, Sandler would say. Pain, right? What are the problems? What problems do they have? Sometimes they can't articulate it. Sometimes we have to help them out with it. Oftentimes we'll say no pain, no sale, right? If there's not a compelling reason for them to do something different, then you're pushing a noodle uphill.
Yeah.
Another part of qualification is going to be what we call investment, right? Are they okay with the fees at the end, or they're going to have to invest some time with us to strategize, or they're going to have to invest some time putting some documentation together.
Well, I imagine these could be historically those clunky conversations or those awkward things when you start talking about how much does it cost, what does having these blunt conversations and upfront conversations do to that dynamic?
Yeah, it's like. I wouldn't necessarily say blunt, right? But what we would say at Sandler is disarmingly honest.
Okay.
Conversations.
I like that. I may
right?
steal that.
I mean, but you think about it, it really is about qualification. And we think about having a compelling reason to do something, right? Pain, a compelling reason to do something different, or investment conversations. You consider that when we're having those conversations with prospects, those are personal. Those are deep conversations. When we're having those deep, transparent conversations, typically we're creating a lot of trust in the process. So pain, investment. Oh, and by the way, one more thing on investment.
Okay.
It's not always about investment. It's it might also be about de-investment when we start to think about maybe they're working with a current advisor.
Okay.
Right? Are they willing and able to actually de-invest in what they're currently doing?
Okay.
So that might also be a conversation along the way as well.
Yeah.
The third piece of qualification would be simply, what is the decision intelligence, right? And I often say when it comes to the advisor space, decision intelligence is not complex, but it's not easy.
Okay.
Right? Because typically you have, spouses. Right? It's hard to figure out which one's calling the shots, which one has veto power, which one's what kind of problems we're gonna start if somebody starts making decisions without the other one involved. And sometimes there's third parties, right? There's a son or there's a child or
family
involved and stuff like that. So understanding decision intelligence is going to be an important mode. When we think about the three qualification steps, pain, investment, decision intelligence, what David Sandler really did with those, he set those in there simply because we don't want to have to deal with that at the end of a long conversation. Let's just pretend we've delivered our intellectual property, our strategy, our investment, right? All that stuff. And then, oh, by the way, at the end, we weren't really sure what the compelling reason was for them to do anything different than what they're doing.
Yeah.
Or, we don't want fees to be an issue. Or I don't want people to say, you know what, I got to talk to my stepson about all of this stuff. He's pretty good with numbers.
Yeah.
Right? We should know all of that stuff before we get to the end of the process. So Sandler says qualify hard.
Yeah. That's time. I mean, it's time. It's how do I not waste time? That feels like what that step is all about, is figuring out who is ultimately going to be in the driver's seat.
For sure. I mean, and that's qualification. Qualify hard. And the idea is when we have those great, deep, next level conversations, closing should be soft, right? And so the other side of closing, when we think about the closing step, Sandler's got 2 steps for that. One's called fulfillment or presentation, right? That's, there's a point in time where we do have to unpack, right, our intellectual property to people.
Yeah.
But then there's also what we call a post-sell, right? A post-sell step is, talking about what happens next, or God forbid you want to set up a future conversation for maybe some introductions or referrals, or maybe at some point in time you're concerned about buyer's remorse. They actually got to go fire their current advisor, and that might be a concern. So those are the 7 steps. But ultimately, when I think about Sandler, and in those steps, our job as advisors, and most advisors don't think of themselves as salespeople, and that's okay. I firmly believe that they're next level in what they do. I mean, they help people in so many different ways. But when I think about it, there are really 3 keys that we need to focus on.
Okay.
Number 1, does that prospect have a problem that we can actually solve? And so we're on a quest to understand that. Number 2, a lot of people have problems, but at some point in time, it's just not important for them to do anything about it.
Okay.
So, right, number 1, is there a problem we can solve? Number 2, is this actually important enough for them to take action on?
So it's almost like a scale of problem for them. Like, yes, it's a problem, but it's your shoe's untied. It's not my shoe doesn't fit. Like it's on a spectrum, so to speak.
Well, and you talk about patience, right? This is oftentimes where people get happy ears, right? They have a great conversation. They don't really inspect whether this is a front burner issue or a back burner issue.
Yep.
And that's some of the language that we end up teaching to people, right? To in a disarmingly honest conversation, Mr. and Mrs. Prospect, here's comes some of the issues we talked about. Help me understand, are these front burner issues or back burner issues, right? Establishing sense of urgency. If it's important enough, right? That's what we're looking for. And the third thing is, do you want my help, right? Which just says, do you want to take the next step on the journey with me, right? And so those 3 things: is there a problem? Is it important enough to fix? And do you want my help?
Is that happening? Is that unfolding in the first 5 minutes of any kind of conversation that you're having?
You know what? It's really so. Like, this is the interesting thing about the advisor space. You've got some short runways, right? Most advisors are on a 2 to 3 call close,
Yep.
And maybe even a little bit more if it's a digital lead of some sort. But so you've got a lot to unpack. And one of the challenges that we've found with advisors, and especially newer advisors, I'm not saying this is all of the more experienced folks, but the new advisors are full of knowledge. I call it technical knowledge.
Okay.
And so, right, they know annuities, they know tax planning, right? They know investment strategies and all of that cool stuff. And sometimes that's all they have to lean into. And so typically we say in the first meeting, we get really, really careful about what technical information we dispense. Our job should be to figure out if they have a problem, how important that problem is, and do you want my help to take the next step? Now, if they say yes on the next step, then we can start to unpack some of that strategy stuff.
How does, a lot of advisors that we work with do seminars, and it almost feels like some of that IP unpacking happens, and then you back up the tape, and then you kind of go to their specific situation. So how does that sort of, not necessarily complicate, but change the dynamic when they actually get to sit across the table from somebody?
Man, I got to tell you, most of the clients that I work with get a tremendous deal of business off of the seminars, whether they're dinner events or educational.
Oh, yeah. They are tried and true. When an advisor does them well, they work. Yeah.
I full disclosure, I'm a big advocate of it. If somebody's not converting, the numbers should be anywhere from 50% conversion to a next meeting. That's typically the numbers we're hearing. Anything lower, then maybe we got a little bit of a challenge in how we present. But that seminar is an opportunity for us to build a relationship. And I say that all sincerely because that really should be the focus. Your content's your content, but the content isn't necessarily the main attraction of that, right? It should be to build relationships with people. And so some people struggle because they'll get into the seminars. They do a lot of talking, right? Talking about all of the cool financial stuff
Yep.
and that. But really, when we're more interactive with people, get them talking, get them sharing a little bit about what they've done, where they're at. That oftentimes leads to people having a more relaxed position and develop this rapport. And so, oftentimes, when we can develop rapport in these seminars, it will lead to those first meetings.
Is a good financial advisor need to be able to sort of be the bridge between the content and the knowledge that they have and the pain points that's sitting across the table from
Yeah,
them?
I mean, hey, it's the axiom that we've heard a million times over. People don't know, they don't care what you know until they know that you care, right? And so, um, they need to be a dual threat on that, right? You got to know your stuff. You got to know your stuff.
Yeah. And one thing that I really love is, and I find it to be true with meetings, is being upfront about what the objective is before the meeting starts or as the meeting starts. Say, hey, we're sitting down for 30 minutes, but when we leave here, we're going to have this figured out. And it sounds like that's such a huge component of getting this process right. How much practice and how can somebody get better at getting that part of the equation right?
Yeah, and that's a big way. It's got to be natural, right? It can't be scripted. And that's
reading.
yeah, really.
Today we're going to solve for X.
Yeah, I had a boss one time when I first went through Sandler. He would do our joint calls, and he was so scripted on his upfront contract, and I wanted just to crawl into the corner of the room and hopefully it goes away.
Yeah.
So it just has to be really comfortable and scripted, but that does take time. But I don't like it when our advisors practice on prospects. I mean, I always say like every conversation you have with somebody earns compound interest, right? So it does give you an opportunity to express yourself and hone in on your talk tracks. But ultimately, that takes time. You got to get into the batting cage and practice that. And that's what Sandler, to me, that's always been the magic dust of Sandler, right?
Yeah.
It's great content, but we also provide the sort of access points into the reinforcement so we can get people comfortable with things like upfront contracts.
So obviously you're going to practice with a prospect a little bit because you're going to get kind of sharpen and hone your skills. But how can a person get better at selling without losing a sale? You know what I mean? Like, how do you actually get to practice it without having it be live ammo?
Yeah. So I always say like pick one or two concepts or theories and work it.
Okay.
Right. And try not to be, some jujitsu master overnight, right? Don't put too much pressure on yourself. But pick one or two things that you say, hey, I want to work on this and go at it, right? Do a pre-call plan, work with your Sandler instructor, however that, work with a colleague. But that's really the way to go about that. Like for instance, upfront contracts, right?
Yeah.
There's some components to upfront contracts. How long is the meeting going to last? What's the purpose of the meeting? What are the agendas? What are the outcomes? And oftentimes I tell people, for upfront contract, if you're going to mumble one thing out of your mouth intelligently, make it be time. Dave, I see we got an hour on the schedule for this conversation. I just want to make sure you're okay with that. Right? Boom, there you've got one element of the upfront contract out.
Uh-huh.
Right? The next one might be, what are the outcomes in the conversation? By the time time we're done with this meeting, we'll lean in, compare some notes. One of us might figure out that this is a great conversation, but it's not worth pursuing any further than today. And if that's the case, let's talk about that. But if there is some alignment, we'll talk about what the next steps look like. Right?
I'm hearing it a little bit in how you're kind of playing out the role play. So I mentioned off the top that I have kids, and it's psychological warfare every day in my house, trying to get them to do what I want, but making them feel like they're in control.
Oh, for sure.
This feels like there's maybe a little connective tissue here about even just how you phrase those questions of, I have an hour. Is that all right with you? Is that going to work for you?
Yeah.
So why is it so valuable to be able to put the prospect make the prospect feel like they are in the driver's seat?
Well, first of all, I mean, it is about them, right? It's always voice of customer. It should never be about us. And we set a meeting for 1 hour, and we intend to keep our agreement on that 1 hour. I mean, a lot of salespeople will take 2 hours if the prospect lets them.
Yeah.
And that's typically somebody who doesn't value their time very well.
Yeah.
And so like things like that really make a difference in creating trust. Go back to that upfront contract, right? It's mutual agreements, but it's also conditioning people to say yes. And by the way, we're going to live up to the agreement as well in that conversation.
What does fishing sound like from the Sandler perspective? Like if you're really trying to figure out what that pain point is, what does that process look and feel like? Because it can feel like it can get away from you really easily if you truly can't figure out what a pain point is in the first, portion of that meeting.
Well, it's interesting you say that because, right, no pain, no sale, right? You're probably not going to go. There's no compelling reason for somebody to do something different. It's probably not going to move, right? And so we always say the emotional compelling reason. People buy emotionally, they justify intellectually. So what I'm hearing you say is, some people either don't have a problem or they've got a really, really thick cement wall between the conversation and what's going on in the back.
Which happens when you're talking about finances and retirement.
Yeah, for sure. It's personal. It's absolutely personal. And so, we've got to figure out a way to disarmingly and honestly have that conversation. So we have a tool called Pendulum theory.
Okay.
Pendulum theory, to me, is the truth tool. It can't be used all the time. But, oftentimes we hear people say things like go for the no. Right.
Okay.
Right. In sales, it's kind of a big term. I don't know if it's overused, but here at Sandler, that actually means something, right? It's a theory that says, well, you know what? If we go a little bit more negative than the prospect is either going to take us a little bit more negative, in which case we know that there's no there, or they're going to pull us back to the positive.
Okay.
All right. And so
I feel like I'm about to get pendulum theory right now.
For example, I don't know if I'm struggling, I'm hitting that brick wall with Dave. I can't figure out, right? It's a game of whack-a-mole and I just can't figure out what brings this person to my office.
Yeah.
Right. And maybe I get to the point in time I say, you know what? I get the feeling that you got it all covered and you really don't need anybody. You don't need my help.
Yeah, I imagine that can go a couple. You're right. I'm out of here. Or hold on now.
It's the truth, right? And ultimately, somebody told me one time they love Sandler because it's a business communication tool designed to get to the truth, right? And so that's a quill in the quiver that we can and we should pull out from time to time if we're struggling with the brick wall.
That notion of getting to the truth. So before we sat down, I was trying to think of, what a great salesperson or what a great financial advisor needs to view themselves as, not just a salesperson. And I thought it's like a doctor. No, it's like a detective asking questions, knowing that you need to get an answer from that person and they have the answers and you don't. That's right. Not assuming that you know what happened here or what's going to happen.
I mean, think about this. If somebody's not willing to share some of these intimate details about their personal finances, right? Their problems or their fears or whatever that is, right? Most of the time it's fear. If they're not willing to share that with you, are they willing to hand you $2 million? I was
going to say they're probably not a very good client.
They're probably
not fun to work with.
Hence, right? It's qualification. Right, we're qualifying, or there are plenty of advisors out there who are like Sandler jiu-jitsu masters, and instead of qualification, they'll say my job is to go out and disqualify in a very disarmingly honest manner.
And you get the nail on the head right there. I was going to say thank you for a very blunt conversation, but I know we don't say that. We had a very disarmingly honest conversation.
It's disarmingly honest.
I'm looking forward to hearing you talk up on stage to our advisors. I know that you guys are working with some of our advisors and have that very specific experience and kind of call track of what they're dealing with. So I'm looking forward to hearing you speak. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us, and thank you for watching. If you're looking for a way to grow your practice, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's the best way to stay on top of all the new content that we come up with, and it feels like it comes out every single day. So like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.